Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how I made my Edward Scissorhands cosplay. If you are interested in making an Edward Scissorhands costume yourself but are a bit overwhelmed, I really hope this video can help. I actually already have a full Scissorhands prop tutorial posted on my channel, so feel free to go check that out to see how I made these scissor hands. I also have a wig tutorial and makeup tutorial posted on my channel. I start by making the base pattern for the outfit. It's kind of hard for me to explain how I make patterns because the way I make them is super simple. I usually just hold up a piece of paper to myself or a mannequin and start drawing out the shapes I need. I think I've just worked with so many different patterns that I'm able to figure out the general shape I need just by eyeballing it. There are so much more thorough and complex ways to make patterns. Some involve math and measurements, but I'm horrible at math, so I avoid that. And others involve the tape method, which is kind of time consuming. I just use the way that works best for me to make patterns. I encourage you to find the way that works best for you since everybody works differently. Also, I'm pretty sure that you can get very similar results by purchasing a basic men's long sleeve shirt and pants pattern and altering it to your needs. Edward's outfit is patchwork and non-symmetrical. While looking at reference photos, I start roughly tracing the shapes onto the original pattern I made. I also make a quick numbered chart on a piece of paper so I remember which piece goes where. Then I cut out all the pieces. After that, I pin them to cheap vinyl fabric. Here you see me cutting different shapes and different types of fabric to recreate the patchwork effect of Edward's outfit. Feel free to use whatever fabric you like. Here you can see all the pieces of the shirt cut out. I repeat all the same steps for the pants. After I'm done pinning and cutting out all the patterns onto fabric, I take the neckline and fold and sew down the bottom edge. After the edge is finished, I pin it to the other pieces of the shirt. I also pin the other pieces of the shirt together on the back side. Then I sew everything together. For some parts, I go over the seam with a zigzag stitch to make it more defined. I use a different fabric for the sleeves, then sew them on too. And again, I repeat all the same steps for the pants. Here you can see a picture showing all the pieces sewn together. I'm not gonna lie, at this part I was pretty worried that my costume was looking like patchwork trash bags. Obviously it doesn't look very good at all yet, but thankfully that will be fixed with the belts and detailing. So let's start making the details. Now I begin by making the many belts Edward has. I'm starting with the thicker one he has around his waist. Making belts are actually pretty simple. I just cut a strip of paper into the size I need for the belt. Then I cut it out on craft foam. Then I pin the foam to the fabric. Next, I curve the end of the foam strip to look more like the end of a belt. Then I wrap and cover the edges of the foam in fabric and pin it in place so I can sew it together. If you really want, you could just glue it, but I prefer sewing. Here I am making the 3 belts he has around his chest. I do the same thing for all the other belts. Just cut the strips of foam, then cover them in fabric, then sew or glue down the edges. I think I made roughly around 20 belts in various shapes and sizes. After I was done making those, it was time to get to the more tedious details. He has this weird crotch guard thing that's kinda shaped like a fan. First, I traced out the pattern, then traced that and made a second pattern for the detailing. I drew out smaller teardrop shapes and put them over the base. Then I cut it all out. I traced the base shape onto craft foam, cut it out, then cover it in fabric just like I did with the belts. Then I cut the teardrop shapes out of a different, thicker vinyl and pinned them in place. Then I carefully sewed them on. Next, I'm moving on to the bold stitching. I take an X-Acto knife and some thick cord and start poking holes and weaving cord through the fabric near the neckline. Then, with a smaller cord and a big needle, I hand stitch over the seams. I should note, it helps to make the stitches look inconsistent, some longer, shorter, closer, farther, and straighter or more diagonal than others. It isn't hard, but it is time consuming, and it's a great time to put on one of your favorite movies. I do this for most of the other seams on the costume as well. Next, I'm going to show you how I made cheap vinyl look less like trash bags and more like worn leather. First, I went over it lightly with some sandpaper to age it a bit. Then, I got out a basic black acrylic craft paint and started painting directly onto the vinyl. I apply it very thinly and dab it on to create a textured look. Here you can see the difference in the fabric before and after it's painted. As you can see, it makes the vinyl look a lot softer looking, more like leather, and it's a lot less shiny looking, so it will photograph way better. I painted most of the fabric, but I didn't paint all of it. His costume has different textures and fabric, so I left some areas shinier than others. Now I'm going to show you how I made all the buckles, studs, and other details for this costume. Edward has tons of buckles and little details all over his costume, and although they are supposed to be metal, finding all of these things made with metal is not only incredibly hard, but also would cost tons of money. And although it may take time, hand-making all of these details by yourself can really save a lot of money. I have a detailed video of how to resin cast up on my channel. I will also add a link to my shop in the description to where you can buy some pre-made resin belt buckle kits. When I'm done making and sanding the backs of all the many details I made out of resin, I begin painting them. I start with a solid black coat of acrylic craft paint. Then I go over that with metallic silver and gold paint. After that, I seal it with Mod Podge. Here you can see all the little details I had to make and paint for this costume. For the more basic details like grommets, those are much easier and cheaper to find at craft stores and even online. They also sell the tools you need to put them in that are very easy to use. You just poke a hole into the fabric and put both sides of the grommet through the hole. Then, line up one side with the base of the tool, take the peg of the tool, set it on top of the grommet, then gently tap it with a hammer to press both sides of the grommet together. I couldn't find darker silver grommets at my local craft store, so I went over it with a black Sharpie marker. I also put grommets through the front of the pants so I could weave thick black cord through it. I also have another tool called a stud setter made to put in studs, but this can be done with pliers as well. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's like a bedazzler or something. They're not very expensive and they make applying studs very quick and easy. As you can see, just press the sharp bits into the fabric, set it over the little bowl shape, and press down on the top. When I'm done with the grommets and studs, I start pinning the belts together and put them where I need them to be on the costume. I actually ended up sewing most of the belts directly to the costume, so I didn't spend a bunch of extra time at the con putting them on and adjusting them throughout the day. It ended up working really well. Now to go back to all the belt buckles and details we made earlier with resin. These are actually really easy to apply. Since the back is sanded, it gives it a rough surface that will hold on to glue well. So I just take some super glue, apply it generously to the back, and press it onto wherever I want it on the costume. It also helps to put on the costume and trace the areas that you need to apply buckles and studs. For the big buckle on his waist, I also added a popsicle stick to the back of it to make it even more durable. And then I added all the cube studs to the waist belt. I also make the little badge thing he has on his chest out of vinyl and craft foam. I coat it with Mod Podge, then paint it with acrylic craft paints. And then glue it all together. There are tons of little details all over this costume, so make sure you look carefully at reference photos to figure them out. And don't be too hard on yourself if you don't get every single detail, because with a costume this complex, most people won't notice if you're missing a few minor details. After I'm done attaching all the belts and details onto this costume, I add zippers and velcro so it's wearable. I added one zipper to the back of the pants to put them on, an elastic at the bottom of them to keep them held down. The shirt has one big zipper down the middle of the back, so it's very easy to get in and out of. And I just use a little bit of Velcro to close the collar. The belt just wraps around my waist and attaches with Velcro. The scissor hands slide on like regular gloves. I cut a hole in the tip of the pointer finger and thumb of one of the gloves. That way I could still use the hand to help with things, like putting on the second glove. Now for the boots. I make boot covers very similarly to the way I make belts. First, I make the pattern, trace it onto craft foam, then cover it in fabric. Since one of the boot covers have a more quilted crisscross look, I first traced it out, then went over it with a stitch. Then I painted the boot to get rid of the shine. I also took some really old boots I had and glued some vinyl over them. I made the other boot cover very similarly, but it's much more simple and I just needed to add some belts to it. Here are the boot covers all finished. They just kind of slide on. Then I pull them up to put my boot on. Then I pull them down over the boot. And it holds with elastic straps that wrap around under the boot. And this is how they look. Also, I'm going to throw in a few quick tips on how to reshape your body for cosplay. It really helps to get a binder to help bind down your chest. Be sure to do your research before purchasing a binder to make sure it is safe for your body. I also use a lifter's belt or back brace around my waist. I will add a link in the description. I apply it on loosely to thicken my waist and minimize curves. I also broaden my shoulders with shoulder pads. You can find pre-made shoulder pads, but I just basically made round little pillows and sewed them into my costume. And that's pretty much it. This has been a dream costume of mine for such a long time. I was so happy to finally be able to make it. I love the movie so much and relate to the character Edward in many ways. I really tried putting lots of love, effort, and attention to detail into this costume while also staying within a restrictive budget. I really hope this can help you with making your own Edward Scissorhands cosplay. Or maybe you learned some techniques that you can use while making another costume. If I learned anything from this costume, it's that even if you get halfway through a project and think it looks horrible and just want to give up, just keep trying until you make it work. And despite working with such a limited budget, I was still able to make my dream costume out of cheap fabrics and craft supplies that I already had lying around. If there's a will, there's a way. Huge shout out to Purple Shala for playing the beautiful music you heard in the video. Also, thank you to my friend Alan for recording the intro clips. You should definitely go check out their channels. I also have an Edward makeup and wig tutorial posted on my channel, and some other makeup and cosplay tutorials posted as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Bye!